Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
This is our worst dual backdrops in our 10-plus years of doing vlogging it's together.
Dueling backdrops.
I think this might be the first time we're both in our bedrooms.
It's not a good look, and it's a little bit creepy. I got to be honest, but I'm hoping that people are not watching us. They should just be listening to this. and for God's sake, why would you watch us? Just download it on iTunes.
Now, I don't know how your week is going, Matt, but this is the 1 week, I don't mean the 1 week, it's the first week of the summer where my children are not in school or camp.
That's not a good place to be. That's the danger zone, my friend.
And while neither has published yet, I've been working on two separate Politico pieces. So I had, I think it was Monday night, I was up till 3 a.m, and Tuesday night I was up until 4 a.m. I had I had no work last night, thankfully. But I did stay up a little bit late to watch Santa Clarita Diet. I did watch a couple episodes of that. I don't know if you watched that show on Netflix.
Mm-mm.
It's a great show, and it's a comedy, but it's serialized. And they canceled it without a resolution. So I got 2 episodes left, and it's just going to end on a cliffhanger, and we're never going to know what happened. So I'm annoyed as I watch it, but I do feel like I need to play out the string.
I did catch, and I saw on Netflix, I did catch a few episodes of the latest Portlandia season.
Oh, I didn't realize it was still going.
Well, either that or they just put it up on Netflix and alerted me. So
that could be.
It could have been. It could be 5 years old.
So is for a conservative, is that fun for you to watch Portlandia? Like, to me, like, I haven't watched a lot of it, but I live in I don't live on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast, but I live in kind of like a similar sort of environment. I went to Oberlin College. As you know, Oberlin College is back in the news this week. Maybe we should talk about that. By the way, we didn't mention that in our pregame, but we can talk about the Oberlin lawsuit. So like the jokes in Portlandia sort of ring true to me because I've sort of lived in those environments. How do you react to that show if you didn't grow up in that?
Well, Bill, I've spent a lot of time in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, which is, believe it or not, essentially the same.
That's the Portland of West Virginia.
Absolutely, you need to come, man. It's a cool scene there, and I've spent a lot of time in Austin. I've been to Seattle. I've been to Portland. Mm-hmm. So I know from. In fact, I actually ran a conservative grassroots training school at Evergreen State College many years ago, which was a very dangerous thing to do. So I've been there, and I like it. First of all, I think it actually satirizes and pokes fun at the left, and and sort of all in good fun. But I think that they really illustrate some of the absurdities amongst progressives. So as a conservative, I find it quite good.
Now, why is there no Portlandia on the right? Why is there no vehicle? Is there no audience amongst conservatives for something done by conservatives that pokes fun at conservatives?
I think there is. I would say the Babylon Bee is an example of that. Now, it's not a TV show, but are you familiar with the Babylon Bee?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. It's really good. It's sort of like The Onion. So it's like a website. I think they have a podcast, but it's mainly a website that puts out satire about religion. So like they'll make fun of Joel Osteen, or like some of the things, like if you ever go to a mega church, they always have to have a coffee shop at the mega church. And like it's kind of stuff that like people who are Christian conservatives will read the Babylon Bee, and it's poking fun at themselves. And it's almost like inside jokes, though, because like if you're not in that culture, you might not actually appreciate what's funny about it. So that would be maybe the best example. And you should, by the way, check out the Babylon Bee. I think you'd like some of it.
I have learned something today.
Yeah, well, that's what we're here for. That's why we have this dialogue.
Speaking of conversing across the aisle in a civilized manner. Joe Biden is having a bit of a rough week after trying to make an argument that we do need to work alongside people that we vehemently disagree with. Not for the first time, he tried to make that point using the example of his early tenure in the Senate when he built relationships with segregationist conservative Democrats. And while he's made the point in the past and gotten a certain degree of guff from the left about it, this is not only in the midst of the actual presidential campaign post-announcement, but he had that, I think, sort of confusing aside about Senator Eastland, who was an avowed segregationist, Biden saying he didn't call me boy, he called me son, which seemed to really amplify the critique that Biden is not only wrong, that we should be genial towards segregationists or anyone else who displays racist tendencies, but he's now using clueless, insensitive language to convey the point. And I gotta say, I just the way Biden has handled it is unusual. On one hand, he's being unapologetic, which, in my mind, irregardless of the issue that we're talking about, as a general rule, being unapologetic is better than being apologetic. Apologies make you look weak. Non-apologies make you look strong.
These are the new rules.
I'm not sure they're all that new, quite frankly. I think.
Well, Bill Clinton survived. Al Franken did not.
But we've had that good conversation in the past.
Although Bill Clinton did sort of apologize at some point, but anyway, you get the point.
Yeah. But he coupled that with demanding Cory Booker apologize. Booker, who had put
out that move. I like that.
Booker had a tough statement towards Biden beforehand. A reporter, summarized it to him outside of I think a fundraiser, and Biden reacted, strongly to that. So he's coupling being unapologetic with punching down. Insofar as Booker's at 2% and Biden's the front runner, and punching down usually is not a great move. Usually that makes you seem defensive and weak, not strong and above it all. So it's I am hesitant to presume it's going to show up in the polling next week that this was bad for Biden. We've had a number of instances where we think it's going to be bad for Biden, and he might tick down a bit here, but he still maintains his front runner position. The Hyde Amendment. Here's the Hyde Amendment thing last week when there are people on the right saying he's getting rolled by the left. He's all this talk about moderation and centrism. He's being pushed around by the base, and and this shows how weak he is. And I even said on TV the other day, being zigzaggy, toggling back and forth between positions, that does show weakness, and that's not a great place to be. Even still, you may arguably tick down a little bit, but still, 30 and above in most polling. And, Warren's coming up, but she's still in sort of, sometimes single digits, sometimes, lower double digits, and Bernie's around the same place. So Biden still has a lead. So I don't know at the end of the day if this is going to matter. I would think if Biden does survive this in the polling, what does get him? This was handled.
Then he's in Trump territory.
Yeah,
right. Trump got to that point where it was like he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't move the numbers. Is that the way? Is that the new normal? I don't know.
Well, this is the question. How. The ongoing debate is how sturdy is the Biden base? Is right. This just name ID, and once you puncture that balloon, it's just going to fizzle out right away, and we'll have a whole new race? Or they're really Biden fans out there? And alongside that, is there a faction of the Democratic Party that is more moderate, that is not impressed by call out culture, and wants to see somebody that pushes back on that and thinks that kind of person is a better candidate to stand up to Trump and to compete in the Rust Belt area than someone who's going to go far left.
This is an interesting. I mean, we could talk about this so much, but like, you know, when I used to work at the Daily Caller, they had an attitude where, like, if somebody attacked us, like, they weren't gonna fire you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, if I used to come on this show, the DMZ, and like challenge people to try to get me fired from my job. Like, please call Tucker Carlson. I would love it. Just phone him, ask, you know. And I think the interesting thing is when you, like, in a sense, you become immune to criticism, and the thing is, people actually quit trying to get you fired because it's a waste of time. And I think to some degree, that's like an analogy for what could happen with Biden. Right. So, like, if he says something controversial and it hurts him or it forces him to react or to apologize, it's like what Churchill said about appeasement, feeding an alligator hoping it will eat you last. I think it chums the water. It incentivizes your opponents and the media to dig for more and to try to cause more controversy because that's a good story. If the numbers don't move, if Biden can say crazy stuff every day and the numbers don't move and he doesn't apologize, eventually it quits being newsworthy and the media will go somewhere else. And so I don't know if that's going to work for Biden. I think very clearly right now he is not getting a pass. He's not going to be allowed to be opaque. He's either going to be forced to reckon with the inconsistencies and contradictions between being a progressive who is winning the African American vote and being a guy who got along with segregationists, right, and was against busing. So, but the question is, if he takes these hits and it doesn't move the poll numbers, does he basically become immune to them? Is he like 6 foot tall or 7 foot tall and bulletproof, or whatever the expression is?
Well, if the numbers are going to move, it's probably going to be because he loses African American support. African American support has been a key pillar to his strong numbers. He generally gets, in the vicinity of, half of the African American vote in what polling we've seen, where you see the crosstabs, and I think there is I don't want to be the person who is the all-knowing expert on the African American vote, so I'm not trying to be that person. I can't be that person. But from what I can glean from the numbers that I've seen is that there's a rough divide between older African Americans and younger African Americans. The Bernie folks keep insisting that they're doing great with African Americans and that the media is ignoring that fact. And I had a not quite a back and forth, but I had a response to one of Bernie's Twitter warriors who on staff who said that Bernie does the best with non-whites, which is statistically wrong so far. Biden does the best with non-whites. Bernie is second. Bernie is doing better with non-whites than people give him credit for. And I think that whereas Warren, who has been moving up into third place, still is not great. She is worse with African Americans and non-whites than Bernie is as of now. That could change, but as of now. And I think Bernie's strength is with younger African Americans who are more left, more anti-crime bill, more eager to have a debate over reparations. Whereas the evidence that I've seen is that the older African Americans are more pragmatic, more moderate.
Yeah. And I think that's the really interesting thing. You said earlier, what if there's just a whole bunch of Biden fans? And so I don't necessarily think that's the right way of thinking about it in the sense of fans who love Biden. What if people just have concluded it's over? Like, Biden is going to be the nominee. Biden has the best chance of beating Trump, and therefore they're not movable. They're not persuadable. It's baked in the cake. They don't care what he says. Biden can say, they've already factored in who Biden is. Biden is a known commodity. He is, he is a gaffe machine. He is nothing. You're not going to learn anything new. And so it's all factored in to the equation, and which means that it's essentially, he's just gonna, what's the Yogi Berra line? It got late early or whatever, it's basically all over but the shouting.
There was an incident a couple days ago. So South Carolina is the first big primary with a heavy African-American vote. Jim Clyburn is the highest-ranking Democratic elected official. He's the number 3 Democrat in the House leadership, and is seen as a dominating influence in the state. He has indicated that he won't endorse in the primary, although at some point he says he might say he was voting for on the very last day. And he said that is in part because there's some tacit agreement with Democratic officials that if you're going to move up the South Carolina primary, I'm not going to quasi-rig it by putting my thumb on the scale. There's a younger African-American Democrat, Bakari Sellers, who apparently is even considering running against Clyburn at some point or otherwise waiting him out to run for that seat. He's endorsed Kamala Harris, and he openly accused Clyburn of being tacitly for Biden and putting his thumb on the scale in the primary. And soon after that, this was separate from the segregationist incident, Clyburn was asked about that, and he said, I work with Strom Thurmond all the time. You got to work with people you don't agree with in Congress. That's the way it works. So there were a number of quotes from other members of the Congressional Black Caucus that were defending Biden with a similar kind of argument. Now these are older people. These are people who have been in the system, who have figured out how to make it work for them, and that's how they dealt with things.
Yeah.
So
I thought Jonathan Chait had a really good column on this. On specifically on Biden and this segregation thing. And look, me, my argument is, generally speaking, I think Biden should own the moderate brand. Don't run away from it. He should don't look weak, and don't hurt yourself in the general, own the moderate brand, own the bipartisan brand, all that. But I think it was Chait who points out, first of all, these segregationists were not bipartisan. They were Democrats, number one. So it's not even a good example of you working across the aisle. It's working within your own party. And number two, couldn't you come up with a better, couldn't you talk about working with Bob Dole as an example or something? Even Mike Pence, which I know he got flack for, I think is in my opinion, a much better and more defensible argument to make. Well, and it's also a better analogy because it's bipartisan. Well,
this is a piece that I'm working on myself, by the way. Okay. So I don't know when it's going to publish, but I'll spill. I'll do some spoilers, if you will.
Yes.
And I've made this point other places. I mean, not only are there better examples for Biden to use, because he's using these examples to talk about civility. And they're not great examples in terms of getting things done. Because he says that, we disagreed on this or that, but we got things done. He doesn't say, here's the thing that I got done with Senator Eastland. I think there are things, basically Eastland was the chair of the Judiciary Committee when Biden first got elected. And Biden won on the Judiciary Committee. And so he got on the wrong foot with Eastland because Biden was championing fully public campaign finance, which made all the old bulls horrified. And Eastland, mocked him publicly, saying he was going to be a first-term senator if he talked like that. So Biden quickly, changed tack, reached out to him, so kind of like, young buck to, old wise man. Tell me what the Senate's like. Tell me how have things changed, teach me. And he built up a rapport with them and got on the Judiciary Committee because of it. And then once Eastland retired in 1978 and Kennedy became chair for a little bit, and then when Kennedy abdicated Judiciary, Biden got the baton. So Eastland plays a big role in Biden's career, and which is why it's sort of an interesting part of his story. But the bills they made together are not that significant. I believe at least there was like a drug bill that they worked on. I mean, and they came out of judiciary. They in some way worked together because they're both on judiciary.
But Chait makes this interesting point, and he has this graph that shows that, like, during the time Biden came of age was a very unique time where you had like liberal Republicans,
conservative Democrats,
and so the party identification was not indicative of ideological stance, and that was Chait, according to the graph that he shows, that was actually an abnormal period of time, but it happens to be the period of time of which Joe Biden came of age.
I might agree. This is more abnormal than that. I mean, most of the history, the parties were not organized ideologically, and so you had more cross-pollination, and now we're more ideologically purified by party.
Well, go look at the Chait piece, and I'm not saying he's right, mm-hmm. but he has this graph or something that shows that what we have done is return to normalcy, or like where we are at today is essentially where we were in like 1911 in terms of the sorting, the party sorting, and that Biden's prime was sort of at the nadir of this, or it could be the apex, however you want to define it.
So and Chait's overall point was that Biden is pining for a time that doesn't exist.
Or maybe not, maybe pining, or maybe just like, there's a thing where like if your baseball team won the World Series when you were 13, you will never abandon that team, no matter how bad they are. Like you'll be locked into that team. And it could be that Biden is locked into a certain worldview by virtue of when he came of age at a time that's very different than the times in which we now live.
Right, and so it's interesting that Chait, who is seen as more of a moderate, more of a pragmatist, a neoliberal but in the words of many socialists, he is making a similar point that many on the hard left make, which is you can't work with these guys. This is a different time. We are polarized. There's not a lot of room to reach across the aisles. You got to find a way to beat them outright and not search for some mythical common ground. And I would argue that while it is true we are more polarized, it is true that bipartisanship will be very hard. If a Democratic president follows Trump in 2021, you're not going to have a 60-vote Democratic supermajority along with that. You might get gains, but the upper bound is probably a 2-3 seat margin, probably more likely, even a tie set or a 1-vote margin. Maybe that could go either way. So finding the votes to get to 60 will be extraordinarily hard. I don't disagree with that. But by the same token, obliterating the Senate rules to junk the filibuster might also be very difficult in a closely divided Senate. And if you can't do that, or if McConnell's still the majority leader, you certainly can't do that. There's not a lot of plan B for the folks who say bipartisanship is a waste of time. And so I would not go back to the segregationists to make a point about reaching across the aisle. I would not go back to the 1990s and Bob Dole to make a point about reaching across the aisle. You got plenty of examples with the Obama era you can go to. You have examples in the Trump era you can go to. Not as many. But
I don't want to defend Chait or play Chait, but he makes the argument that Biden helped get Obamacare passed. But you had the Senator Arlen Specter, who ends up basically being run out of the Senate because of that, and you have Collins.
These are not insignificant, but they're not completely characteristic examples. So Obamacare is a very typical example. It's the one thing in the Obama presidency done without Republican votes, because that was the brief window when they had 60 votes. Everything else, you had to have at least one. And usually, if you in some cases it's a small number, some cases it's a more significant number, but they needed something. Now, the Specter case is interesting. Here's a guy who reaches across the aisle to do the Recovery Act, where that's one of the first things, and then 2 months later feels like I can't stay in this party anymore because I got to leave. And then the Democrats don't embrace him with open arms. They shiv him in the primary and he's out of the Senate. So Che suggests that was the end of that kind of bipartisanship. That's not true. Snow and Collins voted for the Recovery Act and Dodd-Frank and other issues. Biden is able to talk about a bunch of other bills that passed after the Recovery Act. They reduced crack cocaine sentencing on a voice vote. It was so uncontroversial that people didn't even know what happened because they depolarized the whole issue. There's Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, which was not just like a couple of votes. It was a good number of Republicans that came on board with that. Dodd-Frank, Russ Feingold thought Dodd-Frank was too moderate and held out, did not vote for it. They had Snow and Collins, this is after Recovery Act, and they enticed Scott Brown with some wheeling and dealing. Do a little favor for your finance your friends in Massachusetts, and boom, you got Dodd-Frank. Now there are people that don't like this kind of dealing as unseemly, but you talk about what does it take to work across the aisle. You have concrete examples of that. And then under Trump, and look, this is not an era of comedy between Republicans and Democrats. And I will go as far as to say Trump is in a worse position politically because he hasn't tried as much bipartisanship as Obama did. Obama could go into 2012 with a lot more wins because he didn't just write off the possibility of getting Republican votes on things. Trump, even with that in mind, criminal justice reform, which Cory Booker was a leader on. Cory Booker worked with Trump, worked with Jeff Sessions. You could argue these are racist people that Cory Booker's working alongside with. And notably, Cory Booker's statement really didn't complain about Biden working across the aisle with people. He really focused on that he didn't call me boy line, which, quite frankly, I just don't understand what Biden was trying to say with that.
Why would you inject that into the conversation if you're Biden?
Well, I understand how it appears. I know that it looks like he's saying something nice about Eastland, that he called me son and not boy. What a great guy Eastland is. I just don't know that's really what Biden was trying to convey. Because you read the pool report, it's not the same as actually seeing the context, seeing the video of it. So I just don't understand what he was trying to do there. He might have been trying to say, I know that Eastland used racist language and treated me differently because I was white and not black. Maybe that's what he was trying to say. I just don't know. And Biden hasn't elaborated, and Booker is focusing on that aspect of it. But Booker is someone who knows full well you can work along people that you vehemently disagree with and dislike and still find some common ground. So there are things that Biden could say which are stronger arguments than the arguments that he's currently making.
Well, the interesting thing for me is I had this sense with other people, including Hillary Clinton, that by and large, everybody on the Democratic side said, she's, we're not really going to challenge her that much. We're going to give her a pass on a lot of stuff. And it doesn't seem like Biden is getting that. He's not going to be allowed to remain opaque on things. He's going to be forced to come to terms with things that seem to be contradictory and stake out where are you on this. And it's the segregation thing is not the only. It's going to be all sorts of it is all sorts of issues. And I think there's a danger
debates next week
of the death of 1,000 cuts. And I'm very curious if the numbers are going to move. It's been pretty relentless. He has been playing defense a lot, Bill, on different issues.
Right, and I think we'll see if at some point is there too much defense. I mean, if you don't seem strong if you're on defense, you don't seem as electable if you're on defense. So there's a rational strategy on the left to say, let's just keep poking at him, even if it doesn't tip over right away. The 1,000 cuts will eventually be his downfall. Or we may see that if he withstands one more, that base is actually pretty solid, and they don't care for this types of gamesmanship on the left.
It could become demoralizing if you I can just tell you, like, Trump says something crazy about John McCain POWs. Trump makes fun of a disabled reporter. Trump does these things, and as Brad Paisley sings in Celebrity, the more they run my name down, the more my price goes up.
Right.
Like, that's part of what Too Dumb to Fail is. Mm-hmm. It's that the more bad, horrible, stupid things Trump said, the better he did. And I wonder, like, is Biden going to prove to be immune to this or not? And that's going to be, because I tell you what, if he's not, if he starts hemorrhaging, if he starts shedding voters, then it's game on. And then that's going to be very interesting to watch. And I will say, I mean, Democrats, they're invoking now, bringing up reparations, and I just wonder, you know, it's pretty messy on the left right now, and if Biden finds himself, you know, basically having to move to the left to protect his left flank, that's not necessarily going to set up Democrats to beat Donald Trump in 2020.
Now, there's another undercard brewing on the left, which is Bernie versus Warren. The Warren polls are a little muddy. You know, there's certain polls. She is in a virtual tie with Bernie, in more like mid-teens, and there are other polls that don't show much movement at all. I mean, movement from, like, you know, dead last, you know, relatively speaking, to a decent third, but still more upper single digits and not teens. So I think there's definitely movement. It's still unclear to me how much movement and how much room there is for her to grow. But there's an argument that she has more room to grow than, say, Bernie, who has a lower ceiling as a devout socialist, versus Warren, who says that she's still a capitalist and likes markets, just wants them to work better. And you have this piece in Politico, which was largely a series of quotes that came from a Third Way conference, Third Way being a moderate centrist think tank that's always been the bête noire of the populist left. And they had a number of people quoted there saying, you know, Warren's acceptable to me in a way that Bernie is not. And Bernie took a tweet about that from Politico, and it was a tweet in Bernie's name, where he says, you know, this is, I'm not quoting here, this is evidence how much the establishment, you know, is trying to stop us, how powerful we are. And some people said, are you taking a swipe at Warren now? And lumping in Warren with those people? And then there was like some clarifying message from the Bernie campaign. This is not about Warren. This is about Third Way and the Democratic establishment. And folks are like, yeah, well, come on. How do you separate these two things when you were clearly reacting to a story about establishment folks being more open to Warren? So, you know, Bernie's not trying to make it seem like he is worried about Warren, but it's hard to draw a different conclusion that, I mean, she is just as much a competitor as Biden for the nomination, and for Bernie to win, he's got to overcome the strength that Warren is accumulating. Yeah. Are there any other people who are so close? I mean, close in age, very similar, like demographically, regionally, and ideologically. Are there even historically? I mean, I'm trying to think of, like, you know, recent examples where you have two people who are really pulling from the same base as much as those two are. Nothing's, you know, jumping to mind. I mean, you know, 2008, you had pretty distinct characters in Obama, Clinton, and Edwards. And, you know, at 92, you know, Clinton, Tsongas, Jerry Brown, also pretty disparate, a disparate threesome there. And 88, you know, Gebhardt, Dukakis, Jackson, pretty disparate. I skipped 2004. You know, Kerry and Dean were both Northeast liberals. Yeah, that might be the closest thing, although there is definitely a distinction in their approaches. You know, Dean would be much more of a firebrand than Kerry was, but that's probably the closest to comparison to Sanders Warren that I can think of. So yeah, I think it's just fairly unusual. I think it's a factor of how wide a field it is. You got 20 people. You're going to have some overlap in some of your candidates. There weren't people that said, "Oh, Sanders has that lane, so I'm not going to try." People didn't do it this time around.
Right. Well, I guess maybe the 2016 Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, or Rubio and Walker, or something, or Jindal.
No, I think those are different people.
They are. I feel like Warren and Bernie are really, they both have. I mean, there is a populist, socialist, social democratic base, but they're both really drawing from that.
And there are fine points between Sanders and Warren which are real. I mean, one is not calling themselves a socialist. Though some argue that she has even more ambitious plans than Sanders has laid out. So it's not that she's necessarily the relative moderate of the two. And their theory of social change is different. Bernie talks much more about, mass mobilization. Warren talks more about changing the rules. Sanders is clearly skittish about getting rid of the filibuster and packing the court. He fears that's going to backfire down the line. So there's room for argument between the two of them. And I think that argument's going to be had because I'm not totally convinced Warren is on a unstoppable upward trajectory, but I think she's built up enough of a base that she's not going to go away. And that's going to put her and Sanders in constant conflict.
Well, they're always welcome here in the DMZ if they want to have a civil conversation about politics.
Now you want to talk a little AOC, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, we can go quick on this one. I feel like what's happened with AOC and the comments about concentration camps, very clearly she is hearkening to Nazi Germany. When she talks about never again, everyone knows what that means. It's just like Donald Trump. Do we take her literally or do we take her seriously? I mean, when Trump says America first, that means something. When when AOC talks about concentration camps and never again, that means something. Of course, there have been other concentration camps, but that's what she means. Angela Rye on CNN, that's what she heard clearly when she talked about death camps, and that's where we're headed if we don't do something about the southern border. So I do see the media, and a lot of people are sort of attacking Chuck Todd for saying what I just said. I think this is a soft bigotry of low expectations. AOC may not be the president, but she is not just a freshman member of Congress either. She's got twice as many Twitter followers as Nancy Pelosi. So I think she needs to be more responsible with her rhetoric. And the last thing I would say is the problem is the boy who cried wolf thing. I mean, if you're going to talk about the southern border and make allusions to the Holocaust, as she did, that really that puts in danger when something really bad happens, that's actually not an exaggeration. I don't like what's happening on the border either, but when we engage in that sort of hyperbole, it actually dilutes the ability to call out real things when they happen. So to me, this was an example of the double standard and of media bias as well.
Where's the media problem? Isn't she getting criticized for this?
From what I'm seeing, Chuck Todd did criticize her, and he's getting a lot of pushback from, blue check marks. I don't know what we would call these people. Media elites, progressives, liberals in the mainstream media.
But it's more of a left defense of AOC, not a mainstream media defense of AOC.
I mean, there's a fine line between those things.
I agree that you shouldn't call things that are not a genocide a genocide. There are plenty of other words one can use for extremely horrific things that don't confuse the situation or otherwise give opponents an opportunity to confuse the situation. But in the case of separating children from their families on the border, that's not a Holocaust. That's not a killing of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. it's still really horrific. I don't need to create words, or take words from a different, stack of words to communicate the horrificness of it. It's horrific in its own, on its own.
I agree. I think that you could totally make a legitimate case that this is really bad and shouldn't be done, and it's not who we are. But I think that it's irresponsible demagoguery to talk about concentration camps, because you and I both know what that evokes. And when you say the whole never again thing, that obviously evokes the Holocaust. And so to me, this is what was it that Nancy Pelosi said about Ilhan Omar? She has a different experience with language than we do, or something like that, or with the use of words. Her experience with the use of words is different. Okay, but there's a responsibility when you have a megaphone as big as she does, as AOC does. There's a responsibility, and then for people to sort of weigh in and be like, "Hey, you don't know what the word concentration camp or what the term concentration camp means. It predates the Nazis." Well, of course it does, but everyone, again, if Donald Trump said, "We're going to have a final solution to the border crisis," people would be.
I think he has said something like that before.
He probably has. And my point is, it's bad when they both do it.
Well, I mean, as you know, Matt, I don't carry a big brief for AOC. I haven't been on the AOC beat. I don't constantly dog her every time I think she makes a mistake. I'm not as obsessed with her as other people are. But when I think of things that she has done that I find more troubling, are things that are more along the lines of factual errors, which I think encourage a demagogic view of politics, where you make it sound like all you gotta do is take money here and put it here and boom, problem solved, when she's not actually communicating how budgets really work, like that kind of thing, when she is oversimplifying the status quo to such a degree that she is giving people a false view of how a solution can be derived. Like that, to me, is a big problem. The distinction between, is this a Holocaust kind of horrific situation or a non-Holocaust kind of horrific situation? Like that, to me, I agree you shouldn't use Holocaust imagery for things that aren't like a Holocaust, but it doesn't upset me in the same way as other ways I think she is loose with things do.
This is like in Spinal Tap when he's like, when you got your amp and you're on 10, but you need to boost, you need to get louder, but where do you go? You've got nowhere to go, do you? You go to 11. When you start off at 11, where do you go?
I think it's exactly the situation.
She is engaging in people not trusting words and basically tuning out rhetoric because it is again, crying wolf at this point. And I think that's actually
I don't think it's a crying wolf situation. There is something horrific going on at the border. It's not like what's going on there is some sort of ticky-tack issue. It is a big deal. It deserves attention.
But she's comparing it to the extermination of 6 million Jews.
Yeah, I agree.
That is a bit of a stretch.
I would not use that language to describe it, but what it is extremely horrific on its own accord. It's not like this is a non-issue that's a distraction for us. It's a real issue that deserves our attention.
Sure, she could. I mean, I would even, maybe even Japanese internment might be a better analogy. But to cite concentration camps and the never again line, and then ultimately other people picking that up and talking about death camps or where we're headed, I think that sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Deflation. It deflates the power of words.
I think there is going to be a degree of hyperbole in our discourse. There always has been hyperbole in our discourse. My presidential book club, we're doing Thomas Jefferson on Monday. Folks in the area want to come to the Calvin Coolidge Library, talk about John Meacham's Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power. Welcome to do that, 7:30 p.m. This coming Monday. And I had shared with the group that because Meacham's book takes a lot of what Jefferson said about Hamilton at face value. The Jefferson's characterization of Hamilton, Meacham just sort of shares that, to say this is what Jefferson thought of Hamilton. So, he is a monarchist and such. If you read Ron Chernow's Hamilton biography, he pushes back on Jefferson's characterization, saying that Jefferson took a lot of secondhand gossip, or took things firsthand but didn't give him full context. Said lines that Hamilton might have been said as a joke and treated it as literal, and therefore you should not take Jefferson's characterization of Hamilton as the end of the story about where Hamilton stood on things like democracy and monarchy and so forth. So I shared that with the group, and one of the people in the group, who is an historian himself, said to me, that kind of partisan hyperbole was very common on all sides at the time. One of the reasons why, those early years were very tenuous for the American Republic, and people thought that perhaps that it wasn't going to survive because people.
Oh yeah, no, you're totally right, Bill. I mean, they're talking about Caesarism and also, yeah, I mean, basically, people essentially saying that they're dictators or that they're. And then also the attacks on people's wives and right. Yeah, it was pretty rough.
It's not shocking that a first-term congressperson who has never been in elected politics before and is buoyed and came to be because of her fluency in social media, where hyperbole is the coin of the realm. It's not shocking she's going to say something hyperbolic about a situation which is still extremely bad on its own accord. Like, I don't know if you're ever going to rid our discourse of stuff like that.
No, but I think that we should, Bill, people like you and me should hold them to higher standards, to hold them accountable, and not to say, oh, come on, she's just a freshman. No, she's elected to the United States Congress. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying the stupid things that she has said. I would be embarrassed to do it, and I'm not elected. I'm not beholden to the public. They haven't given me some office. I'm not making tax. The taxpayers aren't paying me. I think that it's it's the soft bigotry of low expectations to sort of give her a pass and be like, well, she's new to this.
Well, I don't think they give her a pass. I think you can call it out, but not make her use of language the story. It is a far bigger story that children are being separated from their parents at the border. That is by scores and thousands of degrees the far worse transgression here. So I could say, hey, look, AOC, it's not a Holocaust. Let's be careful with our language, but let's stay unified in trying to end this horrific scourge happening on the border and keep families together. Like that, right. You don't want to lose sight of that.
And Trump could say, maybe I shouldn't have used the word America first, or maybe I shouldn't talk about whatever, but there's a crisis on the border, and that's the people should really be focused on the fact that there's an invasion happening and not on the particular words.
Well, of course, even invasion is a demagogic and inaccurate situation. I mean, it's one thing to exaggerate from something that is horrific on its own. It's another to make something up out of whole cloth that an invasion is occurring when an invasion is not occurring. It's a far different situation.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but I would also say that I think people who have different perspectives on that may come down on different sides of that.
Well, let's leave it on that civil note, Matt Lewis.
I don't know if it's civil or squishy, but we can leave it there. Great show, of course. Another the bad backdrop episode. But the content.
Always sparkling.
Yeah.
Anything you got to plug, Matt Lewis? I think you had an interesting conversation the other day.
With George Will, yeah. George Will, of course, is out with a new book. I think it's called The Conservative Sentiment. And he has been making the rounds. He was on every podcast known to man, and C-SPAN, and every TV show, and when you book a guest, you don't necessarily know that. I mean, with George Will, you could probably assume, but you never know if you're like going to be one of the first people or anyway. I decided not to sort of ask him about the book per se, but I threw it open first to my supporters on Patreon, Patreon.com/Matt Lewis. Join our coffee club. And then to my Twitter following and solicit questions. And we got some great questions. And I ended up, instead of asking him the same things about the book that he'd kind of rehearsed and answered a million times by the time he got to me, I asked him about like Charles Krauthammer and baseball and, you know, all sorts of things. What he thinks of Pat Buchanan, for example, like a whole bunch of different interesting things. What his dream job is, things like that people sent me on Twitter. And to his credit, I think he enjoyed it and had fun with it. He was not angry that I did not ask him about the book. And I think it turned out to be a super fun and informative conversation where I just got to ask George Will all sorts of random weird things. And when else am I going to have the chance to do that? So it was a lot of fun.
I cannot envision George Will having fun.
When I asked him about his hair, how he has such nice hair, he did chuckle. But the other thing is, one of my Twitter followers asked me to ask him what his dream job is. And when I mentioned the guy's name, Will started laughing because that guy is now the TV play-by-play announcer for the Cubs. And, of course, George Will's dream job is to do that. But I didn't even realize that this guy following me is the play-by. So that was one of those – to me, that's the kind of thing in this business, Bill, that is the most fun and rewarding is when you discover, like, someone following you on Twitter who's actually interacting with you on Twitter is – like there's no scenario in 1987 where my dad thinks I could, like, contact Harry Carey and, like, direct message him, which didn't even exist back then. So, anyway, check it out. I highly recommend it. It's a fun conversation. Again, I think George Will spent a lot of time answering the same questions about his book. And I think this kind of got him a little bit off message in a good way. And so check it out, Matt Lewis and the News.
And I think I might have mentioned this last week, but it's up now. My interview with Ryan Grimm, author of We've Got People. He's also the D.C. bureau chief at The Intercept. His book about tracing the rise of the new progressive movement from Jesse Jackson to AOC. Great conversation. So check that out at New Books and Politics at the newbooksnetwork.com. And also it was past Monday, I had was that my last Real Clear Politics column? I believe it was. I'm already blanking on what I wrote about. But that was. Sorry, everyone's probably already shut off the podcast app by now. But
by the way, it's called. Did I say the conservative sentiment? It's George Will's book is The Conservative Sensibility.
Oh yes,
is that right?
Yeah, no, I didn't write Real Clear Politics last week. I got to do it for this coming week. So look out for something on Monday, whatever that's going to be about. And I'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, everybody follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show, and we'll see you back here next week. Thanks,
right.
Bill.
Bye-bye.